Want to sell more books? Make sure you're at the Self-Publishing Show live this summer. Meet the biggest names in self-publishing at Europe's largest conference for independent authors. Enjoy 2 days packed with special guests, an exclusive networking event, and a digital ticket for watching the professionally filmed replay, including bonus sessions not included at the live show. Head over to selfpublishingshow.com/tickets and secure your spot now. The Self-Publishing Show Live is sponsored by Amazon KDP.
On this edition of the Self-Publishing Show.
We have better taste than we have talent when we're starting out. So we know when something's good, we have good taste, but we don't have the talent to produce it yet. And so you start to write it and you go, oh, this is terrible. Yeah, it's supposed to be terrible.
Publishing is changing. No more gatekeepers. No more barriers. No one standing between you and your readers. Do you want to make a living from your writing? Join indie bestseller Mark Dawson and first-time author James Blatch as they shine a light on the secrets of self-publishing success. This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Hello and welcome to the Self-Publishing Show with me, James Blatch.
And me, Mark Dawson.
Mark Dawson, you have a very important announcement to make regarding... We have a new Patron supporter who we forgot.
Oh, yes, I did. We did forget. Yeah. So her name is Gina Danner of No Fixed Abode, or at least that not notified to us. So thank you very much, Gina, for supporting the podcast and joins several hundred supporters who very generously chip in once a month and help us to do things like transcripts and all that kind of stuff, which is not cheap. But we do like to do it because not everyone likes to listen. Some people like to read. Yeah. So they can do that. So yes, thank you very much, Gina, and everybody else. And if you want to sponsor the show, you can go to
patreon.com/self-publishing show. And I think it's once a week, by the way. I think it's once an episode.
Once an episode, yes. Yeah. So it's very gratefully received. Everyone who several people have been around for years, which is very kind of them.
They're going to be rewarded soon, whether they like it or not, with some items of clothing.
James is going into the attic.
I have been into the attic, and there's some merchandise. In fact, I'm wearing sort of one. Looks back to front for complex reasons, but some hoodies and baseball caps and T-shirts is going to be going to our long-standing Patreon supporters. A little treat. Okay, look, we have a good interview today with John Gaspard. I really like talking to John. He's been around the block a bit. I hope he doesn't mind me saying that. Makes him sound old.
It's too late now.
Worked in the film industry, has worked alongside people like Jon Favreau and Bob Odenkirk and Steve Soderbergh, or is it Soderbergh? Never know. And
Steve Soderbergh, your first name terms. It's not even first name terms. Me and Steve, good mates.
And John has put together, he understands story really well, and he particularly understands it from filmmaking, but that does obviously mean it's more or less the same thing in novel writing. In fact, a lot of the techniques they use in script writing are really excellent in novel writing, because it tightens your book and tightens your story to get in to scenes late and leave early and all that sort of thing. That's what he's really big on. So he's written this brilliant book, which is called The Popcorn Principles, on how novelists can use those same tips that they use in Hollywood to improve their books. And we went through some choice ones in this interview. We could have done a 4-hour interview. I promise you with this, you are going to enjoy it and you're going to learn something from it, as I did. So let's listen to John Gaspard, and then Mark and I will be back for a quick chat at the end.
This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
John Gaspard, welcome back to the Self-Publishing Show.
I am thrilled to be back. I'm surprised to be back, but I'm back.
Hey, it's fun to have you here. Last time we talked about your magic-based fiction series. I can see you've got an Eli Marks, if you're watching on YouTube, Eli Marks branded top there.
Yes. My bowling shirt, yes.
It's a bowling shirt, there you go. And you've been going great guns with that. I think you're quite inventive and imaginative with your marketing. That's what we learned last time. But today we're going to learn a bit about using film story structure to help us with our novels. Is that right?
Story structure, and also just sort of some of the tricks of the trade that I discovered in interviewing a lot of filmmakers. I've made a number of independent films myself, but I also have written a couple of books that are primarily just interviews with pretty well-known filmmakers like Roger Corman and Jon Favreau and Steven Soderbergh. And these books are for filmmakers, tips on how to do a better, simpler, lower budget version of what you're trying to do. But I found that I was using a lot of those same techniques when I switched over to novel writing, and I started just taking notes on it because I'm often asked to talk about that, because when you're doing book panel things, they want to look for that interesting hook. And my hook is I made a half dozen low budget movies. I sold some stuff to TV, and then I switched from script writing and screenwriting to novel writing. And making that leap, I found there's some things that they're doing in filmmaking that we can do in novel writing to make stuff better.
Yeah. I mean, there's obviously a lot of crossovers, because the obvious point to make is a good story is a good story and needs to be told, whatever the format is, whatever the medium is.
Yes. Movies are all structure. That is the most important part. Well, character is very important, but the structure. At what point do we tell you what in the story? The spine. And you only have 90 minutes to do it. And so it's pretty easy to kind of step back and look at that spine. It's a little harder in novels because we have more words and we can take little jaunts off to the side. And it's sometimes harder to see where that spine is and where we need to fix things. So I found that by looking at some movies and looking at some of these tips, I was able to make what I was writing better. I wasn't using it as the foundation for the writing, but just looking at the tips, I could go, oh, I should go back and do this, or I should go back and do that. I need to remember to do this, remember to do that. So it's a very helpful sort of checklist as to what are they doing right that I can be doing right.
Yeah. If a novel's typically 100,000 words, how many words would it be if it was just the film script?
Well, I recently took a film script that I'd co-written with a friend of mine called The Sword and Mr. Stone and turned it into a novel, thinking it would be easy, and it's not. But most film scripts are probably 12,000 words, maybe
Wow.
15,000. And I remember talking to someone, a writer friend, who said, well, you must love the fact that with movies you can write tons and tons of dialogue. And the fact is you can't. You can write tons and tons of dialogue for a novel, but movies, everything has got to be pretty tight, and there's got to be a reason for it being there. It either progresses the story, the character, or gives you a laugh, or all three. So they're generally very, very tight.
Yeah. There are some things I'm jealous of with movie writing, in that if you've got somebody who's troubled or in a particularly emotional state, but they're not verbalizing, they might be by themselves. That's something I can visualize filming. You can see it on their face. You can see the rain on the pane of window as they look out. It's very difficult to do that in a book because you're obviously having to describe it, and you don't want to tell, you want to show. So I am occasionally jealous of filmmaking techniques to help tell the story.
You know, I wish I could remember the name of the actor, but a famous actor was talking to a young actress who was trying to do a very dramatic scene, and he took her aside and said, you don't have to do all that. The violins will do the rest of it for you. And it was true. She didn't need to do much. The music was going to do that. And in novel writing, we can't do that. I was talking to a playwright friend recently who writes plays and screenplays. And I said, you're a very good writer. You should write novels. And he said, that's too many words. I don't want to write
it's too
that
hard.
many words. And I don't want to describe, what the sunset looks like. And I said, well, with my Eli Marks novels, they're all first person. And Eli never describes what the sunset looks like. So it's a little bit easier first person. But there are still 10 times as many words in a novel as in a screenplay.
Yeah. So you've written a book, John, for novelists.
I have. I've written, it's a brief little book called The Popcorn Principles, a novelist's guide to learning from movies. And in it, I've taken 25 things that I've learned from talking to the filmmakers that I talk to for my filmmaking books, and taken the principles, those 25 that I think work for novelists, and set them down. This is not a book that's going to help you write your book from beginning to end, but it is a book that's going to help you make your book better.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't know if we can do all 25, but should we have should we try and pick out some of the key ones and have a little flesh a couple of those out?
Sure. You want me to jump in and just tell you some of my favorites? Well, one of my favorites is they call it in the film business, and I'm sure novelists talk about it too, the idea in a scene of coming in as late as possible and leaving as early as possible.
Yeah.
And the best analogy that I've ever heard is, think of it as a party. You want to show up when everything's up and running, and you want to leave before it all dies down. And in film, we can just cut when we want to the next thing. And the example I use in the book, in the 1964 movie, The Producers, with Gene Wilder and Zero Mostel. There's a couple long scenes that the editor talked Mel Brooks into just cutting basically taking the middle of both scenes and putting them together and getting rid of the ends. And as a writer, Mel Brooks was very much against it. But as you see when you watch the movie, it's much more impactful because of what you take out. There's a real power in taking things out, and that's sometimes we'd love our scenes to go on and on when in fact we should cut them. In fact, even Aaron Sorkin, who is pretty darn good at writing a scene, has said that his new rule is he tries to, when he's done writing a scene, cut the last line out and see if it makes it better, and it usually does. And I've done that in the Eli Marks books, and it's true. You often tend to write one more line than you really need to, and if you do that over 26 or 36 chapters, it's getting a little flabby. So that idea of just getting in as late as you possibly can to the scene and then getting out as quick as you can is something you can see happen in movies, and it's something you can pretty easily adapt to your writing.
Yeah, that's such a good tip, I think, get in late, leave early, and it is something we forget. I think I read the same Aaron Sorkin clip as you, where he said, in fact, I think he said something like, I rarely read a scene that wouldn't benefit from losing the first line and the last line.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's just amazing. But it's simple to do. There's kind of a corollary to that that I learned from editor friends of mine, and they call it cutting the shoe leather, which is get rid of any of those things of people walking from one place to another, which you can really see. For example, the example I always use is the old Columbo TV series, which they were 90-minute movie of the week, so they're probably 70-some minutes long. There's a lot of walking between places. And if you compare it to Ryan Johnson's new show, Poker Face, which has a direct connection to Columbo. I mean, he's even using the same font for the title as Columbo and the same premise of we see who the murderer is up front. They get rid of all that shoe leather. And it's stuff sometimes we'd like to write about how we got from point A to point B. But again, if we're looking at get into the scene as late as possible and get out of the scene as late as possible and get rid of the stuff in between we don't need, you'd be amazed how taking things out makes things better. My favorite example, and maybe people will remember the movie Tootsie, there's a very pivotal scene with Dustin Hoffman in his agent's office, and he is talking to his agent about trying to get work. The agent is saying, no one will hire you, no one will hire you. Dustin Hoffman lays out in that scene, and another nice thing about that scene is it's a really good expositional scene and that it's a funny argument, and they get a ton of information out. That's a whole other point. But at the end of the scene, the agent says, no one will hire you. And Dustin Hoffman says, and you see him thinking, and then they cut. And the next cut is one of my favorite cuts in all of filmmaking. It's a busy New York street. You see people walking toward the camera, and then we begin to see this woman in the center of the screen, and it's Dustin Hoffman dressed as Dorothy Michaels. We've made the instant cut from him in the office to that. And in the DVD commentary on it, the director, Sidney Pollack, said, we shot all that in between stuff. We shot him talking to drag queens. We had him trying on wigs, trying on clothes, trying on girdles. We had a whole sequence, and it just was much more powerful to go, this is the thing I need to do, boom, and make that cut. And if we can see when we're writing, and I've done it myself, the very first Eli Marks novel had a scene where it's like Eli describing how he got from point A to point B, and I went, I'm doing it. I'm doing shoe leather here. I've got to cut it out. It's what William Faulkner said, cut out those parts that readers tend to skip. And I think sometimes if we're honest with ourselves as we're reviewing our writing before you get into deep editing, you might sometimes glaze over a paragraph, go, oh, yeah, I know that paragraph, I know that paragraph. Well, that's your mind telling you, do you really need it? Do you really need that? And is that shoe leather, and can we cut it out?
Yeah, there's a great comedy writer. I'm going to try and find his name, but I won't be able to, I'm sure, on TikTok, who I follow, and he talks about shoe leather a lot because he gets asked a lot of questions, and he said, how do you deal with the time it takes people to go to the fridge or go next door? And he said, we don't do it. He said, that's shoe leather. We just don't. And it's the most common thing they get told in the writer's room, cut the shoe leather. So you'll see if you watch Big Bang Theory or whatever, the latest sitcom is, there's no mucking about. unless it's a point, unless there's a point to it. And that's really the question we need to ask ourselves, I guess, here, is if you want them, like in Back to the Big Bang Theory, if you want them walking up the stairs, you better damn well have a reason for that and it'd be integral to the story. Otherwise, it's shoe leather. Yeah.
When I was making low budget features, I never got to use a crane because I didn't have the money for a crane, but I always remembered the advice of an editor friend who had said, if you're doing a crane shot with people walking and you're like coming down and you see them coming down to the building, he said, you better have some pretty darn important dialogue happening there. Because as an editor, if there's nothing going on like that shot except for a crane shot, I'm going to cut it.
Yeah.
And I've always thought about that. What are you trying to do with the shot, but is it really, really necessary and can you get rid of it?
Yeah.
Because now it would be a drone shot.
Yes, of course. Cheaper than helicopters and cranes. I used to do pieces to camera when I was a news reporter, and we used to have an editor who used to say, you're walking from nowhere to naff. He didn't use the word naff. You're walking from nowhere to naff. Why are you walking? So he always used to say, do a walking piece to camera, but be sure you're trying to tell a story with that. Where are you going? What are you revealing? If you're just walking towards the camera, it's just stupid. I used to get told off. Anyway,
do you remember you ever see Eric Idle's movie of the Ruddles, his takeoff in the Beatles?
Oh, yes. Yeah, he does
He has a great shot where he's walking down the street and obviously there's a car in front of him that's backing up and the car starts to speed up and he's trying to keep up while he's telling the Ruddles story and he ends up running. Yeah.
Perfect Mickey take of how stupid that walking piece to camera often is.
Yes.
Do you know, we've just done one tip and it's been brilliant and I've loved dissecting that bit. So get in late, leave early, love it. That's such a good tip. And very few scenes will not be better for doing even that afterwards. Okay, should we do another one?
Sure. This one is a bit more ephemeral, but it's something I keep in the back of my mind. And I call it Keep Lester Awake. And the reason I call it Keep Lester Awake is I got to talk to a really great film director named Stuart Gordon. Stuart Gordon directed the movie Reanimator and a bunch of other horror films. But before he was a horror film director, he directed in Chicago. He directed a lot of theater, kind of avant-garde theater, cutting-edge theater. And he said to me, one thing he always thought about while directing his plays was keeping Lester awake. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I had a very wealthy patron and she would come to every production and we loved having her because she gave us money and she loved the shows, but she would bring her husband Lester along and Lester would invariably fall asleep and snore. And it became his mantra to make sure there's always something happening on stage to keep Lester awake. And I always think about that when people say, well, I want to read a book. I'm going to take a book to bed and help me go to sleep. It's like, that's the exact opposite of what I'm trying to do. I want you to keep awake. So as I'm looking at scenes, I'm going, is this keeping, do I need this? Is it keeping Lester awake? Is it grabbing onto the reader? Or is it just something I put in because I had to put in or wanted to put in? Or worst of all, and I'm as much of a sinner on this as some people who have to do a lot of research. Did I put this in because it took me a long time to find this thing and I want to have this little factoid in there? Is it really keeping Lester awake? So it's that idea of constantly making sure that everything's moving forward and there's something going on so that whoever reading it won't be able to fall asleep. And in my mind, it's Lester.
Keep Lester awake. I like that one as well. The key here, I think, is to trust your reader, isn't it, in deciding what to leave out and what to put in. That's one of Stephen King's great sort of themes, is that you don't have to explain everything to the reader. It's better for the reader to be...
Yeah.
Dan Brown does this brilliantly in his books. The reader's slightly ahead of him, which is very clever because you feel great as a reader and want to turn the next page. Whereas if you over-explain stuff... that loses a little bit of the reason people are reading.
Yeah, there's a filmmaker I talked to. A couple guys made a movie called The Last Broadcast, which was about, it was a digital feature about some people who went out into the woods and were terrorized and died. And it came out 1 year before the Blair Witch Project and didn't do as well as the Blair Witch Project, but was sort of the same premise. But their documentary, he used what he called theater of the minimal, which in their film world meant we don't have to have all the details. We just need to have a few of the right details and the audience fills in the rest. So, for example, they're doing an interview with a supposed psychologist. they didn't need to have a ton of stuff. They just made sure there was a diploma in the background on the wall, so you got the sense that you were in a doctor's office. And I think I try to do that as much as possible, which is put in just enough detail that the reader knows what I'm talking about, but not to overload them with detail because I happen to have done all this research and I know this stuff now. There's a tendency to want to tell them everything, and I think it is much stronger to tell them less and also to let them get ahead. There's two books that I always recommend when people say, what should I read if I want to be a writer? The Popcorn Principle is not one of them. Although if you want to read it, it's great.
It's sounding like it should be to me.
It's
fun, all over it.
From a standing start, you're probably better off reading Bird by Bird and then reading Stephen King's On Writing. And I believe it's at the end of On Writing that he prints a good chunk of a story that he's written and then includes what the editor has done to it. And it's really telling because you think, oh, well, it's Stephen King. He just writes it and they publish it. Like, no, the editor, he or she is going through and doing all kinds of stuff. Personally, I think they could have often gone a little further and cut even more stuff.
Because he had long books, didn't he?
Because he has long books that sometimes end and then end and then end. But it's interesting to look at it and just realize, because that's one of the hardest parts, I think, for people starting novel writing is it is really intimidating, particularly when you and I are sitting here and saying, yeah, there's 60,000 to 100,000 words. That's really intimidating. I was lucky that I worked in corporate communications for 30 years where I was writing video scripts and proposals and speeches and things. And so I'm not intimidated by the blank page at all because I know that I know it's going to be written. And so that part is removed from me. And for that, I'm very lucky. But for someone starting out, you get this impression that you have to be able to just sit down and write it and it's going to be perfect. And it's not. It's not going to be perfect when Stephen King sits down and writes it. Someone is going to have to come back and fix it. I'm reminded of, I think, Ira Glass, who had this really brilliant insight about creative process and I'm sure I'm screwing it up somehow, but the idea was the problem is that we have better taste than we have talent when we're starting out. So we know when something's good, we have good taste, but we don't have the talent to produce it yet. And so you start to write it and you go, oh, this is terrible. Yeah, it's supposed to be terrible. Nobody tells you that. So when looking at the example that King puts in On Writing, it is nice to go, oh, this guy has written 50, 60, I don't know how many novels he's written now. He still has an editor who has to help him fix stuff.
Yeah.
And that's one of the key lessons, I think, in the book is the idea of, I call it just stop getting ready and start writing. And it was something that I run into all the time in the film world, where people want to write a screenplay or they want to make a movie, and they do so much prep and prep and prep. And I got to listen to this podcast. I have to read this book. I have to read this interview. I have to do all these things when, in fact, what they should do is just sit down and do it. And they're going to learn by doing. And the best film example of that is Robert Rodriguez, who made El Mariachi and then went on to make a ton of other movies. He famously put himself in the hospital for a drug test for 30 days. And he took the money that he made from the drug test and he made El Mariachi for, I think, $7,000. That's how much he did. And his thinking was, I'm going to screw up, but I'm going to screw up and learn. And it's well worth $7,000. It's far cheaper than a film school to go do it. Well, to write a novel is far cheaper than $7,000. You just have to be willing to be bad at first. And that sort of thinking that I'm just going to go do it and get it out of my system once and be bad is the stumbling block that a lot of people just won't go over because they want it to be great right away. And it's just not. It's not going to be.
Yeah. I think it's a Hemingway quote, isn't it? Everybody's first draft is shit.
Yep.
And that's one of the great writers. And I always think from my experience, I didn't realize it at the time, that all the writing I did, because I wrote an entire novel, threw it away, wrote it again, threw it away, and then wrote it a third time. And the first one was huge. It was like 140,000 words. I felt it was hard. It was difficult. This is rubbish. I'm not going anywhere. And only now, looking back, do I realize that every sentence I wrote got me to where I ended up.
Yep.
And there's no shortcut to learning how to write. You have to write. and it has to be shit. You have to go through that phase. You just got to sit down and write every day. The single best advice I think you can give a new novelist, new writers, just write every day, even if it's shit. Keep using that word. Yep. And it is, by the way, I'm writing a first draft now, which I can tell you I've stopped writing it about 3 days ago because it was so shit. And now today I've told myself off and I'm back into writing it because that's okay. It's going to get me to where I'm going to go. Yeah,
you just can't, this whole perfection thing, you just got to get over that. Even when it's done, it's still not going to be perfect, but it's going to be as good as you can get it at that time. And you can, you can Spielberg it or Lucas it and go back and CGI out, take out the guns or
let's not do that.
It's best not to do that. It's best to leave it alone and move on. When it comes to I feel very lucky because of the 30 years of writing corporate stuff where I had to write every day and you have no choice. I remember going to a pitch meeting and we had our boards and we had everything all worked out. And the client said, you can take as much time as you want because the people who are going to pitch after you aren't coming. And I said, because we knew them, I said, are they okay? They said, yeah, they called and said they don't have any ideas. And I thought, I didn't know that was an option.
Yeah.
To not have an idea. And so having that background, and then also the other thing that's been a huge help for me that is an advantage that I realized later on that I had was I shot movies that I wrote. And so I would write a scene, I would shoot a scene, I would edit a scene. And if I found in the editing that I didn't need that scene, the editor would be very mad at the writer who'd made the director go shoot that, because in a low budget movie, to go shoot a whole scene that you don't need is, if you do that a couple times and you've used up your budget. So I'd learned early on to figure out what it is I really needed in it. And of course, it's so much easier in a novel to just go, oh, we don't need chapter 3. It's gone. As opposed to, I don't need that scene that took me 2 days to shoot and I had to find that location and all those actors are going to be very upset. It's just much easier in the novel world.
Yeah. This is good stuff. I'm enjoying it. In fact, I'm thinking, you asked me what I watched on the planes. I just got back from Canada and I watched the Fletch reboot mentioned, but I also watched the reboot of Star Trek and the new one. And I was shouting at the screen, not out loud because people would have thought I was insane, because they did, this is a big budget production, I assume. They did so much telling in the first 2 minutes. A captain in charge, basically, with an underling who she's going to make captain. Jesus, we've got their life story with them just walking along. And I thought that's so unrealistic that people would be all the way down onto an alien planet and then have a conversation about why they're there. And I thought, just treat me a bit more of a grown-up. Oh, by the way, it got better, and I'm getting into it. But it's not to say that you'll watch a big budget film or TV and they won't be making these mistakes, because it just underlines how hard it is to get this right.
Exposition is really, really hard to bury it and to hide it. And I put a couple examples in the book that I really like. That one was groundbreaking at the time, but it's been done to death, which is the first 9 minutes of the movie Citizen Kane, which is a newsreel of Charles Foster Kane's life. And it hits all the high points we're going to see in the movie from a slightly different point of view. And what viewers today don't understand is that newsreels, that particular 9-minute segment, is making fun of newsreels at the same time that it's telling the story. But it does the same thing that Bill Paxton does at the beginning of Titanic, when one of his crew members and he are talking to Gloria Stewart, and they're showing her the CD rendering of the CGI rendering of the ship and how it broke apart, and they're basically giving us exposition.
Yeah.
But they've kept it interesting, although I would say that particular character of Gloria Stewart is maybe the last person in the world you have to tell about what happened.
Yes.
On the Titanic, because she was there.
She noticed it at the time. Yeah.
But also in Jurassic Park, they did the same sort of thing where they have the original Jurassic Park. They have a theme park ride that the guys go on that shows them how the dinosaurs were created. And it was a very clever way of getting that exposition out, as opposed to, and I just saw it in a show the other day where they cut to a policeman talking to a suspect in an interrogation room, and the character actually said, "Okay, Harry, let's go through this again one more time. What happened?" And I recognize you've got to find a way to get that information out. You just have to try to be more clever about it. Sometimes in movies and TV shows, they just don't have the time. I mean, they got to tell you the stuff, and you got to get it out that way. But there's a play by Tom Stoppard, a one-act play called The Real Inspector Hound, and the play opens with a cleaning woman in a sitting room, and she turns on the radio, and as she turns it on, I'm going to read it here because I have it in front of me. She turns it on and voices, "We interrupt our program for a special police message. The search still goes on for the escaped madman who is on the run in Essex. County police, led by Inspector Hound, have received a report that the man has been seen in the desolate marshes around Muldoon Manor." And he goes on. And I thought, it's such a funny way to get that information out because it's so obvious.
Yes.
In fact, he's making fun of it.
Yes, if you're going to be, you may as well just do that, and they get everyone all laugh, thinking, "Oh, here we go." I think Star Wars is a great example of what Stephen King wants people to do, which is to say less. You don't have to tell everything because it's actually quite exciting when things unfold, and it's slightly mysterious to you what they're doing there. If you look back at Star Wars, and it's such a familiar film now, it's quite difficult to look at with fresh eyes. Loads of stuff is not really explained. Yeah. You don't really, as a kid, I didn't really know what was going on the first time I watched that, and it's gradually grown to, one of my favorite films now. But that's fine as well. That's a good way of doing it. You don't have to be clunky about this.
Yeah, in the book, I call it "Don't spill all your popcorn in the lobby," which is don't tell everybody everything up front. They don't need to know everything up front. They can learn things. It's more fun to kind of learn things along the way. Yeah. My favorite example, and it is a plot point, but it's from Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid, and I think it's fair game to talk about it now, is when they are running from the posse and they're standing on the top of the cliff, and the only way out is the river hundreds of feet below. And Butch says, "We'll jump in. They won't be able to follow us. We'll swim to the other side. We'll be fine." And Sundance says, I can't. And he finally says, I don't know how to swim. To which Butch says, "Are you crazy? The fall will probably kill you." Now, this little bit about Sundance Kid, who's the coolest guy in the world, can't swim, William Goldman was smart enough to just wait and put it there. Yes. He didn't have to tell us up front anything about it. And I think when you reveal stuff like that to audiences, they appreciate finding it out. Yep. We talk about Aaron Sorkin. I talk about him all the time. In The West Wing, the reveal of President Bartlett having MS is doled out very sparingly throughout season one. In fact, I don't think he was even halfway through season one before Sorkin figured out he knew he wanted a debilitating disease that would not necessarily be visible, and he wasn't sure what it was, but there are clues throughout. That sort of reveal, audiences love that. So don't tell them everything up front. They don't need to know everything up front. They can be a little bit curious about why is that happening? What is that?
Yeah.
I mean, when my wife and I watch, streaming shows, we watch a lot of British mystery sorts of things. There's always that wonderful moment of why did he or she do that? And you don't find that out for a while. Anthony Horowitz, when he did Magpie Murders as a TV version of his book, did a brilliant job on that. He has a series from many, many years ago called Collision, which is, I think, 5 episodes, and it's explaining what happened to make a car accident happen on the A12 or something. And over 5 episodes, you find out about all the people who were involved in it. And he does not tell you everything about them. You have to sit in confusion, sometimes for 2 or 3 episodes, about what's going on. And then they tell you. And I think that's a much more engaging way of doing it than spilling all your popcorn right there in the lobby.
Have you seen Happy Valley, talking of British series?
We haven't started it. I know about it only because I follow Nicola Walker on Instagram, and all she does is promote her friend's show, Happy Valley. Which I think is really charming of her to do that.
Yeah, it's. I think it's one of the best written TV series in recent times. I warn you now, it's grim, but it's very, very good.
We just watched the Banshees of Inisherin, so we can handle grim.
You can do that. Okay, look, I think we've got time for at least one more. Let's. I'll
give you my favorite, which I use throughout life, and it'll take you a second to get it because it took me a second to get it, but once you hear it, you'll never forget it. I'm probably building it up too much. Bob Odenkirk, who's probably best known in Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad, was a sketch performer and writer, long before he did that, and also made some low-budget movies, one of which was called Melvin Goes to Dinner, which I highly recommend. Melvin Goes to Dinner is a 5-character play that Odenkirk saw in Los Angeles. It was a late-night thing that was these 5 actors did. It is 4 people sitting around a table in a restaurant and a waitress. And a couple of people know each other. They all kind of know each other, but don't all necessarily 4 know each other. And it's the revelations you find out that happen over their long dinner. And the play version is called Fire Giants. The movie version is called Melvin Goes to Dinner. And they shot it essentially in one night, one long night in a restaurant, because the actors knew all the lines. They'd done the play forever. And in talking to Bob Odenkirk about it, he had a lot of really good, smart things to say about low-budget filmmaking, because he's a very smart guy. And I said, what piece of advice would you give to filmmakers that you think that they're missing? And he said, don't hesitate to hesitate. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, in the film world, if I'm shooting a scene, I'm on a set, I've shot the scene, I've shot all the pages for that scene. Don't pack everything up and go away, because you've got the set, you've got the actors, you've got the cameras, you've got everything there. Don't hesitate to hesitate. Take a moment and ask yourself, what else can I do with this before I shut it down? And that's a phrase that I use all the time, particularly before I finish a book. I don't hesitate to hesitate. I stop and I put it in the drawer for a couple of weeks. And I'm very lucky because I'm independently, I'm me. I am the publisher. I'm not following someone else's schedule. I don't have to get something to somebody. I'm not driven that way. And that's just the way I like to do it. But the idea of just stopping, taking a breath, looking around, take a break, come back, look at it again. It's a rare thing we're given. Because as Odenkirk went on to say, I can't do that anymore. We don't have time to do that. I had the same thing from Steven Soderbergh when I was talking to him about Sex, Lies, and Videotape. And he said, I had a 31-day shooting schedule on Sex, Lies, and Videotape. I have never felt more leisurely on a film production ever since then. The next movie I made, or the second one after that, the George Clooney one, I'm blanking on the name now, he said it was a $45 million budget. He said, I felt like I had a gun to my head every day. So we're very lucky when we control our schedules. And a lot of times we've made up our schedule. It's a pretend thing we made up that said the book has to go out on, April 15th or whatever. We made that up. We can stop, let it sit for a minute, look at it, take a break, and come back and see what else we can do to it. That may, in the case of filmmaking, require reshooting. In the case of novelists, it may require rewriting. In the film world, there is no shame in reshooting. More and more people are now budgeting a couple days to reshoot. And I think budgeting some time when the book is quote unquote done to maybe rewrite is not a bad idea, because 2 weeks from now, you might have a whole different take on something, or you might wake up and go, that's the line that needs to close it. So I just have Bob Odenkirk in my head saying, don't hesitate to hesitate.
Yeah, that's nice full circle, because we talked about cutting stuff out that's not necessary, but actually you can sit back after those 2 weeks and think, what's missing? What might be missing from this? It might be something small, something clever. Like, you often think these very clever little details in stories, like he drinks from a whiskey tumbler in chapter 1, and then she drops that tumbler when she hears he's died in chapter 30, and it's a lovely thing that not everyone's going to see, but you can put that in afterwards. That's the beauty of it. It looks like it's cleverly done right from the beginning. It's exactly the sort of thing that helps tell the story on different layers.
Let me give you one more real quick example, because it's one of my favorites, and it's the idea of callbacks, which is exactly where you would find that sort of thing at this point, is when you'd be going back and sifting through, have I missed anything? My favorite callback of all time is in the movie Casablanca, when Claude Rains says at the end, round up usual suspects. He says that because by saying that, he is not having to tell his men that Humphrey Bogart has killed the Nazi. He's found a way to save them both by saying round up usual suspects, which is a phrase that he's used, I believe, twice earlier in the film as sort of a grim throwaway line. the writers, the final writers on Casablanca, the Epstein brothers, were assigned with writing like the last quarter of the movie while they're shooting the movie. So movie shooting, Epstein brothers are working on the ending, and they have a very pretty locked down idea of what needs to happen at the end of Casablanca. We know that he's got to make the decision with Ingrid Bergman. He's got to shoot Major Strasser. But they keep hitting this thing of he's killed Major Strasser. Why doesn't the local prefect, Claude Rains, arrest him right there? Because essentially he's killed his boss. How do we make that happen? And they're driving to work one day, and they turn to each other at the same time and say, round up the usual suspects. It was something we said earlier in the movie. It was something we had no idea we were going to call back. It allows Louis to repeat something he said earlier, and to also, as a character note, let us know that he is not entirely transactional in his relationships, that he does have some feelings for Humphrey Bogart, which then leads to the closing line. Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship, which was written in the editing and dropped in. That line came even later.
Wow.
So this idea of just stopping, taking a breath.
Yeah. And it's also your thing you said earlier about perfection doesn't come out the first time.
Not at all.
So this Casablanca, a lot of people think is like a perfect film, but all these bits were added in the last gasp in the edit room.
Absolutely,
and
right at the
looks like
end.
they were crafted there for years. Yes, and I was just thinking of In the Loop, I think is the British comedy film, sort of documentary style. It slightly annoyed me about that film. I loved the film, but there's a bit of a Chekhov's gun moment in there, because the sort of ebullient US general in the Pentagon has a live grenade on his desk, and he's always thumping his desk. I thought, for God's sake, that's got to explode at some point. I was so disappointed that film ended and it didn't explode, and there was this like massive red blob in his office.
It's probably you're probably very upset with all the pies that are seen in the background of Dr. Strangelove in the War Room, and we never see the pie fight.
Yeah,
but they did shoot a pie fight. They just cut it out, but you can see them in the background. Yeah, the movie originally ended with a huge pie fight, and in the editing, it's one of those things where it's like addition by subtraction. Kubrick looked at it and went, that's just tonally not working with everything else.
Yeah,
but you can't see them in the background. They're waiting to be used.
Gentlemen, you can't fight in the war room. It's the great line, and that's another movie that's close to perfection. Brilliant, John. Honestly, we could have gone for another hour, and we're going to have you back, and we'll do some more of these.
Cool.
I think this has been a really useful interview for people to listen to. Certainly for me. I'm going to grab your book. Just give us another plug. Give us the title and where we can find it. Sure,
you can find it. Boy, I think you can find it everywhere. Am I wide? Yes, I think I'm wide with it. Yes, I am wide with it. It's called The Popcorn Principles, A Novelist's Guide to Learning from Movies. And I will give a little plug to AI, which gave me the title, The Popcorn Principles. That was not my original title. And it just is, I just heard Joanna Penn go, she had one of her longer episodes about chat, whatever that thing is called.
GPT,
So I just typed in what my original title was and said, give me a funny version to this. And I came back and went, all right, you win.
The robots are winning. Okay.
Yes.
John, thank you so much.
That's always a pleasure, James. Take care.
This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Yeah, really good book, Mark. I really love talking to John about that. I know you haven't heard this interview yet, but you're going to listen to it. And I think even a seasoned writer like yourself can't help but be helped by that sort of tip from somebody who's been at the sharp end of Hollywood.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's never stop learning. It's you pick this up all the time. And I had a chat with someone that we're publishing with Fuse yesterday, and chatted about a book that he's thinking about writing. And it was good to address that in a critical way, not critical as in critical, but kind of constructively critical way to help him to hopefully craft something that's very commercial. And that's based on my experience and things I read, and he had some ideas too, and it's a good exercise to kind of dig in and try and hone something. And someone with John's experience would be perfect for that as well.
Yeah. In fact, I think it's a really good idea to have a kind of buddy who you do this for. It's expensive to hire a book coach each time you want to write a book, but having somebody you'd give your outline to in exchange for when they write a book, they give their outline to, and just having a call and going through stuff, because a third party, I'm doing this now for our romance authors in Fuse, who we're going to publish shortly. It's obviously not my genre, but I've read enough romance and I know how stories work. They're just having a second pair of eyes on an outline or in this case, a manuscript, and saying, wouldn't it be better if this is a bit tight or whatever, is a really good thing. I think we can all help each other like that. I might have to find someone who will be my writing buddy.
No.
Didn't ask you, actually.
Good.
But, okay.
It's not happening.
Yeah, I mean, I have my little tiki bar group, we call ourselves, which is really brilliant for discussing stuff. But it'd be good to have.
I think one of those authors might be number one in the US at the moment.
I think one of those authors is. Yeah, we should say.
and number 4.
I know that Lucy and Tim listen to the show. They're often driving, so they're doing a lot of driving at the moment. I saw a video of, this is Lucy Score we're talking about, whose follow-up book for Things We Never Got Over has hit number 1 in the store, and obviously brought the first book back into the top 5 as well. Phenomenally successful. I saw a video that someone took in a store in Florida yesterday, just trying to find the end of the queue. It was snaked all the way through the shop and out the door. It was incredible. She is a rock star, and couldn't happen to lovelier people. And we should also give a big shout out to Tim, who is it's a cliche, isn't it? The power behind the throne, but that is a cliche. So let's avoid that one. But he's
a supportive partner who helps run our business.
More than that, he's a very important part of the business. He's the ads man and does a lot of that stuff. That book.
Yeah, I had a good chat with him when we were in Tampa last year. Really, he's always someone in the business. Sometimes it's the author as well. The author also has those skills as well. Tim is very good in that kind of structured way and able to see things strategically. And also, I think he's got 6 screens, which appeals to me. I think I saw a picture of his office once with 6.
Envy.
I've got three screens, but you can never have too many screens. No. Although if I had 6 screens, I wouldn't be able to see the view that way, which is very nice. So I think I'll stick with 3. But I can admire 6.
Yeah, three's good. You'd have to start building up, wouldn't you? You'd end up with this bank.
I think that's kind of
mission control.
It's what he's done. Also, it's very much Terry Pratchett did that as well. Terry Pratchett had 6 screens. 2, and God knows how he had a computer powerful enough to run 6 screens in those days, but I guess he did. But these powerful Macs these days can do that in their sleep. So
yes, although my MacBook Pro is on its last legs, I need to mention that to you at some point. We might have to dip into SPF coffers.
I was actually thinking about buying, but I would buy one myself. Anyway, we can talk about it. Maybe we'll buy. Don't tell John. We'll buy one. And
I think he's after one as well. So
oh God,
he can have a MacBook Air. Look, okay, that's it for this week. Thank you very much indeed.
We could sell that to him. Is this good for his health?
Yes,
it's not as heavy. Anyway, yes, carry on.
Thank you to John Gaspard, and that book again, if you want to get it, and I've got it on order, is The Popcorn Principles on How Novelists Can Use the Same Tips from Hollywood to Improve Their Books. And of course, to our team who put this podcast together, thank you very much indeed, all of you, and thank you for listening. That is it. All that remains for me to say is it's a goodbye from him.
And a goodbye from me.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Get show notes, the podcast archive, and free resources to boost your writing career at selfpublishingshow.com. Join our thriving Facebook group at selfpublishingshow.com/Facebook. Support the show at patreon.com/self-publishing show. And join us next week for more help and inspiration so that you can make your mark as a successful indie author. Publishing is changing, so get your words into the world and join the revolution with the Self-Publishing Show.